Estamos ao vivo.
Olá, bom dia a todos. Dando sequência aqui ao colóquio, ao 20º colóquio Habermas, é o 11º colóquio de Filosofia da Informação. Nós vamos começar a conferência The Status of Post-metaphysical Imperative in New Public Sphere, com o professor Fernando Suarez Müller, da UVH. Acho importante dizer que nós estaremos a todo momento anotando as perguntas e dúvidas, então não precisam deixar as dúvidas e perguntas para o momento final. Vocês podem ir colocando no chat durante as apresentações. Ao final, nós conversamos aqui com o professor, nós vamos ter entre 15 e 25 minutos para a gente debater os pontos que foram levantados. Então, não vou tomar aqui muito tempo da apresentação para a gente conseguir deixar bastante tempo para o debate, mas agradecer ao professor Fernando Suarez Müller pela participação dele na conferência, agradecer aos presentes, agradecer a organização do evento. Bem, bom dia, uma boa apresentação para todos nós.
Thank you very much. Yes, so my name is Fernando Suarez Müller. I'm assistant professor at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht, and I'm going to speak about the status of the post-metaphysical imperative in the new public sphere. That's the title. First of all, I want to thank Professor Clovis Montenegro de Lima for the collaboration he made possible between the University of Humanistic Studies, Utrecht, Holland, and IBIX in 2014, for the many invitations since then, and for this one to join the colloquia on Habermas again in particular. Thank you very much, Clovis. So let me start with this title that was issued not long ago in the Foreign Policy magazine in June 2024. So the title is "The world still needs Habermas," and I agree with it. I agree with it in the sense that we need Habermas also to contradict him, and that's one of the things I would like to try to do in this session of today. I agree with Habermas and the basics, but there is a couple of things that I do not agree with, and I would like to correct or maybe to amplify, to enlarge, in fact, in his system of communicative theory. So the subtitle of this Foreign Policy magazine is "The German philosopher is starting to outlive its liberal legacy." So, and this is, in fact, of course, we see there is a crisis of the liberal legacy today. There is a crisis of liberal democracy. We see it in Brazil, of course, with Bolsonaro. We see it in the United States with Trump. We see it in all the countries in Europe. The right-wing developments are huge. There is a real danger for democracy coming up everywhere. And so maybe we should think beyond democracy. One option would then be to rethink Plato's Politeia, which was a critique of democracy. And I think this critique should be taken seriously. One of the things we can learn from Plato is that he tried to develop, I'm not saying that we should take it over, but we can learn from Plato. He is trying to develop a non-liberal, deliberative system, which is not democratic, it is aristocratic, but it is deliberative. It is based on the deliberation of wise, deliberating politicians and philosophers. Is thinking about the state of philosophers. And of course, philosophers, what do? They deliver all the time. So there is a concept of deliberative politics there from which we can learn. So what we could learn from Plato is maybe the idea or the concept of a non-liberal deliberative democracy. Although he is not speaking about democracy, we can learn about the non-liberal element of it. So my point is that in Habermas' work, liberal and deliberative democracy are too much entrenched. He should separate it. And my point is that Habermas' work, liberal and deliberative democracy, are also entrenched with the concept of the free market ideology, because liberalism is a concept that also is very much entrenched with the concept of the free market. So, and we should be moving towards what in the concept of, or the ideas of Bruno Latour would be called a Gaian democracy, a democracy that is ecological, or in the concept of Hans Jonas would be called a responsible democracy, which is more based on collective restrictions of ecologically impactful actions. And these restrictions must be self-imposed by a system of deliberative democracy. And if this does not succeed in the future, we will probably end up in some sort of tyranny, I think, I'm afraid. So one of the two things I would like to do, a bit of original in this presentation, is to combine these two books of Jürgen Habermas, his last books. The one is about a history of philosophy. It's a philosophical book. It's a magnum opus. In fact, the second magnum opus, 40 pages. And the other one is a sociological book of just 109 pages. It's a small book in which he reacts to his first book that made him known and made him famous. So in my abstract, I say in my presentation, I want to discuss the latest two works of Jürgen Habermas, one of which is A Large History of Philosophy that defends a post-metaphysical position. The other one goes back to the first book on the public sphere and actualizes it in view of the developments of current societies. This is a sociological work. So what I would like to do is to merge these two books that in the work, then in the philosophy of Habermas are not connected, or has not still been connected, to connect them in such a way that I come up with an argument that is contrary to the argument that Jürgen Habermas is trying to make. And he is trying to make two kinds of arguments. One is the philosophical argument based on also a history of philosophy, in which he says that we are moving towards an age of post-metaphysics, where we need to move towards a post-metaphysical age. And on the other hand, in the other book, in the sociological book, he's claiming giving a very negative, I would say, conception of the social media, the new public sphere. And so I would like to merge these two arguments and to see if we can have a kind of solution to the problems of that could enhance the deliberative politics in a more positive way than Jürgen Habermas does. I hope to make that clear. So first, let us have a look at this book of also History of Philosophy. It's a huge book, of course, and its main argument is the history of philosophy, in fact, is moving towards a post-metaphysical age. But what does he mean with it? So there are a lot of points he makes, and so let's specify the argument. So first of all, he says he joins forces with the Enlightenment and with positivism, modern positivism, and also neo-positivism against the metaphysical tradition, especially against his own tradition, the German tradition, transcendentalism and idealism. And on the other hand, that's one argument. On the other hand, he has the post-secular argument, in which he says religious traditions are still important, but we need to focus them from a post-secular perspective, which means that they should be embedded into a larger secular conversation in which philosophy can try to translate the sacred languages of religions into secular language. So he is very negative about metaphysics on the one hand, which is a rational tradition in philosophy, and on the other hand, he is positive about religious traditions, which are not rational traditions, but are traditions of faith, you could say. And what we have to do is to try to translate in philosophy, we have to try to translate these traditions into a secular language that is non-metaphysical. So it has to be translated into a political and ethical philosophy, you could say. So in fact, these are the two big movements he's trying to make in that book. On the other hand, on the background, you have this very positive element that we see in all the work of Habermas. He's trying to argue for free communicative processes and to say that they are necessary not only for the survival of society, but also for its progress, for the development of a broad process of rationalization. He is extending the concept of rationalization that we saw already in the 60s and 70s, when he said, no, strategic rationalization is not enough. Instrumental rationalization is just a reduction of the real rationality, which is a communicative rationality. So this is the positive Habermas that is still behind all these last books that he has written. So the implicit claim is that any society that curtails, that cuts the conditions of free dialogue, cuts itself off from the modern process of rationalization. So, but this is strange, because at the same time in this book he is trying to curtail and to cut off from the metaphysical tradition. He is trying to create a kind of post-metaphysical imperative, and this means that you have to cut off from a rational tradition that was part and parcel of European philosophy, of in fact universal philosophy. And why? Because it says there is no cognition of metaphysics possible. There is only belief. So metaphysics has been sacrificed by the modern rationalization of philosophy, he says, which has come to understand that worldviews are only cultural representations. So he says metaphysics dealt with worldviews, but worldviews are just cultural representations. There is no rational discussion about that possible. You have to believe it or not, and then he is reducing, in fact, metaphysics to a kind of religious beliefs. So, but in fact, what I would like to do in this presentation is to show that we need metaphysics, yeah? and we need it for a new public sphere and for a new politics of deliberative democracy, and I would like to make that argument. So I think first of all we need metaphysics because it's reflecting about ontology. Why is there a dignity of man, for example? Why do we separate the entities in the world? Why do we see here we have humans, there you have animals? Based on what properties? So this is ontology, and this is reflecting about this is metaphysics. And saying that some entities have dignity and others do not have dignity is already doing metaphysics. And in fact, if you say we should just constrain rationality to the human domain, then you are in fact becoming an anthropocentrist. And this is what is the danger of the philosophy of Habermas, to become anthropocentristic. And so on the other hand, so we need metaphysics on this hand, because we need to enlarge the concept of ontology to understand why there is a human dignity. Maybe there is dignity in other entities. On the other hand, we need metaphysics because metaphysics is dealing with the whole. It's a broad philosophical interest, and it is not just a philosophical interest that is limited to human society. For example, political philosophy would be just interested in human society, but metaphysics cannot just be interested in human society. It is interesting in politics, but it is also interested in the larger whole of the world of being, in fact. So, and I think these are things that we need in our ecological transformation of the future society. So for an ecological transformation and transition, we need metaphysics. That's my argument. Just to get in a bit more into the argument of Habermas that he's making, it's a huge book, so I cannot describe everything, but just the main concepts. Again, According to Habermas, the course of Western theological and philosophical history shows that a process is on the way in which philosophical metaphysics is being progressively abandoned, he says. So he's trying to do in all these pages that he's writing to show that, in fact, philosophical metaphysics has been abandoned in the 19th and 20th century. As we will see afterwards, this is nonsense. This makes no sense at all. There is a lot of metaphysics in the 19th and 20th century, but he's trying to make this argument that metaphysics has been abandoned because there is no rational discourse possible anymore. On the other hand, he's still also making this secular argument again that confessions, religious confessions, are personal and need to be respected, and that could add to the general debate, because there are different intuitions that we could in religions that we could translate into existential and ethical language. But all these are personal beliefs, you could say. This is on the level of the doxa and not of the episteme, you could say. So he pleads for a detranscendentalization, as he calls it, of reason. He already did that in other books before, so he's summarizing what he said before, and he's saying it again. So detranscendentalization, just to use this word, means that he is separating himself from the German idealistic tradition. So according to him, this means that reason is only in humans. So reason is connected to the human capability of communication. So this seems that whereas in the 60s and 70s, he was broadening the concept of rationality away from strategic rationality to a communicative rationality, he is now getting into the limits of the concept of communicative rationality, because this is in fact just a human, an anthropocentric concept of rationality. Yeah, so he cannot conceive a broader concept of reason, because for him, reason is connected to communicative action. And the same is with the concept of life world. The concept of life world that we would connect to, in fact, everything that is alive, that has a life, that is, in fact, ecologically relevant. He is not considering it from that side. He is considering it from the side of human communication. So the life world is always related and confined to human reason, to human communication, and therefore it becomes an anthropocentric concept. So and again, he says from religions we can learn a lot, but these are intuitions that need to be translated into non-metaphysical terms, so in terms of ethics and of politics. But he acknowledges that there is a danger in the post-metaphysical age of a nihilistic entropy, he says, and only these religious beliefs, which are personal and must be translated by philosopher in ethical and political terms, can restrain this nihilistic entropy. So why I think that metaphysics still matters, as I said already before, we need it for an ecological enlargement of reason. First of all, I would say to abandon a metaphysics of consciousness makes no sense, not even in the context of Habermas theory, because Habermas theory of communication still needs a unitary concept of reason, and communication is just a procedure, you could say. So in fact, it's a misunderstanding that there is in Habermas. He's thinking that the procedure to get to reason and to truth is in fact all there is, whereas truth and reason is beyond this procedure, I would say. So if there is truth in this world, then there is a reason to discover. There is reason outside there, and you cannot say reason is just the communicative action between humans, because humans are communicating about something, discussing about something which is outside of the world. So this formulas that we discover in science about physics are in fact not just discussions. They are not the product of communicative reason alone. They are a reality outside there. So if we want to have a realistic concept of the world and of reason, then reason cannot be limited to the human communication itself, because human communication is just a procedure, you could say. There is also, very importantly, a very anthropocentric restriction in Habermas. So, in fact, he cannot see any reason or rationality outside the human communication, or it becomes very difficult, you could say. So, intelligence in the animal world cannot be recognized as rationality. Or not even in the animal world or in the world of plants or in any world at all. So rationality seems to be connected to this communicative action and is not conceived in a realistic way, in the philosophical sense of realism. So, and the same you see in the Habermas concept of equality. It is very much based on human dignity. Human dignity, of course. Why do we have humans' dignity? He says because we have communicative rationality. Okay, but why should that be important if you see that other entities in the world have other qualities? So you need a metaphysics to develop that kind of thoughts. So he needs a larger concept of rationality. So in the way he is talking about rationality at this moment, about human dignity at this moment, it is not possible for him to get outside the human domain. And so the non-human domain, ontologically speaking, has no rights. There is a neutralization of nature as an object of dignity and reason. That's where it's amounting at. And Habermas operates in a fully anthropocentric worldview, for which he needs a metaphysical grounding that he's not delivering. So what did the idealists in the 19th century do? He is reacting against them, but why were they creating a kind of ex-transcendentalization of reason? Because they wanted to make clear that there is a transcendental consciousness, a concept of reason that extends beyond the human mind, you could say. Yeah. So there is a kind of intelligence out there in the world that can also be present in other entities and not just in human beings. And also his, as I said before, his claim that 20th and 19th centuries philosophy have been mostly post-metaphysical is not true. As you see, just to name some important philosophers: Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Bergson, Heidegger, Whitehead, Deleuze, all these people who he doesn't speak of are developing metaphysical positions because they want to enlarge, to extend the concept of reason and of dignity beyond the human. So what my point is that I think that training in metaphysical thinking is a training in the most basic presuppositions of thinking itself, of thought, of being. And it is necessary for real critical thinking. So if you want to develop a critical theory, Habermas is a member of the critical theory tradition, then you should try to develop a critical thinking that is as broad as possible. That's what the first generation of the critical theory did. Adorno was very much engaged in a metaphysical conversation with Hegel. Horkheimer was very much engaged with a metaphysical conversation with Schopenhauer. Erich Fromm was very much engaged with a metaphysical conversation, starting from Plato. So we see that the first generation of the critical theory had the knowledge or had the intuition that critical theory is not possible if you just set aside metaphysics, because you need a reflection about the most basic presuppositions of our own worldviews. And this is what metaphysics does. So I think metaphysics is therefore needed for critical thinking, and I think that therefore, if we now move towards the other book of Habermas, which is about the public sphere, but more about the social media, you could say. His argument is social media constitute a half public, so half private, half public sphere that endangers the constitution of a democratic will, you could say. And he says this because he thinks that the social media are not delivering, are not enhancing critical thinking. But what are his arguments? He says the traditional media. So what he researched in his first book on the structures of the public sphere. In the traditional media, you see that information was critically filtered by professionals like journalists, editors, program makers. And what he says, this is now not the case anymore in the platform media or in the social media. You have to do that yourself. You need to be you need to be critical yourself. You need to have all the skills yourself. So in fact, it's presupposing an autonomy of thinking about which Habermas is skeptical. It seems that he tries to say that the large public is very much not able to do that. So that's why his solution in his book, this small book, is that platforms should be restrained. YouTube, Twitter should take up responsibility and critically filter information themselves. So they should auto-censorize themselves. In my opinion, this will imply a kind of censorship, but who controls the censoring power of the platforms? So my take, the whole approach is very negative of social media. Habermas' approach is very negative. Like his approach of metaphysics is very negative. And I think there is no reason for that. So in my take is that what we should do is not to enhance censorship or to enhance self-regulating structures of platforms that we cannot control and therefore limit free speech. But we should not limit free speech in metaphysics, and we should not limit free speech in the social media. My take is that we need a new social media education. And the chaos of internet information is in need of educated critical citizens actively scanning diverse types of information. In fact, what we need are citizens as little philosophers. Yeah, so we should give a thorough training in schools about how to deal with social media. But at the same time, we should also give a training about critical thinking. But critical thinking means philosophical thinking, and it also includes metaphysical thinking, because in metaphysics, you are thinking about the main proposition, the last presuppositions of our thinking itself, of our worldview. So what we see in Jürgen Habermas' book, last book, is that he has a very negative concept of the social media, in which he only focuses on the dangers. He never mentions the advantages, although he says there are advantages, but he never mentions them. He doesn't make them active to understand how the public sphere could be enlarged by the social media. So he emphasizes all the fake news and alternative facts that we see in the social media, but he never says anything about fact-checking that is also happening in the social media. He's speaking about fake images taking place in the social media, but he is not speaking about the fake image detections that also takes place in the social media. He's speaking about artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, creating fake texts, but he's not speaking about also the critical awareness that is growing due to these new developments. He's also speaking about the automatism in which people become just repeating the opinions of others. But he is not speaking about the autonomous argumentations that you also encounter in the social media. And what he's saying, the social media are lacking lacking the cognitive standards. So they are a kind of media that that do not apply cognitive standards to themselves. But on the other hand, it is clear that in the social media we encounter a lot of cognitive standards. There are a lot of podcasts about philosophy and about science, about cognition, that can enlarge people's cognitive standards. So that could be treated in a more positive way. So he also speaks about a holistic bombardment of information, so a chaos of information. So you don't know how to digest all this information. But on the other side, you could also look at this as a multiple information strategy, as a possibility to get access to different types of information and to process it in a unity. And this is the holistic approach, which you need to unify information. So how to react? In my view, Habermas is reacting by a kind of censorship. He says there should be more content regulation. And it seems to be the same in metaphysics. It's a kind of censorship. This is a way of thinking that we don't want to do anymore. So he's limiting free speech and free thought. In my view, what should be done is a real solution is to adapt the educational system and to enhance critical minds of people by social media education on the one hand, and by a broad philosophical training on the other hand. And this philosophical training is not just about politics or about epistemology, about cognition, but it is also about metaphysics, because metaphysics deals with the fundamental presuppositions of thought and with the whole, and which you need if you want to process a lot of information. So, in fact, it's about a new educational system that could create little philosophers that could be the new actors in a future deliberative democracy. And that is, in fact, the point I would like to make now. I still have 10 minutes, I think. So, I already said here before that Habermas is very much negative about the social media. In this last book he wrote, he mentions that there are advantages, but he doesn't exemplify anything about that. So he never mentions this positive element and the positive impact of the social media on the public sphere. And I think this is too one-sided. It's really too one-sided. If you just have a small look at what is happening in the social media, you can see, first of all, the concept of the public sphere is much broader than the concept that Habermas is using. Habermas is using a concept that is completely limited to politics. It's a concept of public sphere that is limited to the public interest, to the political interest. But in fact, what we see in the social media is a public sphere that is much broader and is not limited. It is outside the political interest. It is not limited to politics. It's also politics, but not only politics. And if you look at the the podcast on philosophy, for example, we see very interesting new developments in social media. So in fact, what we see is that the authors of the future are raise up and present their own thoughts first in this domain of the social media, and then they write their books. And what is very interesting to notice is that this development of philosophy in the social media is primarily centered on the development of a new metaphysics. So it's not post-metaphysical at all. It's completely the reverse. So in fact, the best watched authors, the people like to think, to look at these authors are metaphysical authors like Ian McGilchrist, John Vervaeke, Bernardo Kastrup. So these have very large audiences. So this is what the social media apparently want. They want to have reflections on metaphysics, on worldviews, on what is behind our first primal thoughts. So philosophical critical thinking is now, in fact, thanks to the social media, to the disposal of everybody. I would say this is a more positive approach to the social media than Jürgen and Habermas gives. I don't want to enter into other advantages. Of course, there are a lot of advantages of social media. It's a counter movement. They are reversing a process of power. Exclusions by mainstream can be reverted. And also in science, people who in the academic are censored can now find a place to express their views. So there are a lot of advantages that I will not discuss now. I just want to come to my conclusions in the last 4 minutes that I have. First of all, I want to come to the connection with deliberative democracy. So what we need is a new social public sphere, a new public sphere that can learn to create a new critical rationality because of the holistic structure, or you could say the large structure of the new social media. The social media have deficiencies, but there are also a lot of advantages. There is a lot of information to win there and to improve our critical thinking. And so I think social media are a positive thing for a future deliberative democracy. And very important is that we will see that in this social media, 2 things become important. One is to think deeply into the first presuppositions of what we are saying. We see that in the metaphysical, in the philosophical podcasts that are appearing in the social media. They are going into in deep thought about metaphysics. And so, in fact, this is the presupposition to not exclude anything, any part of philosophy from critical thinking. We need all philosophy for critical thinking, and mostly the metaphysical part, because it's reflecting about the first presuppositions. And another thing that social media are delivering is a huge amount of information. In fact, a totality of information, and everybody has to be able to process that, to give that a unitary, holistic vision of the whole, you could say. So it's making possible that people can go into the depth and into the broth of all the information. And therefore, I'm much more positive that the social media can contribute to a deliberative democracy. I don't think that the deliberative democracy can continue to be a liberal one, because a liberal deliberative democracy will always be dependent on a system, an economic system of the free market. And I don't think that the free market has a future in that sense. The deliberative democracy will be about critical actors, critical political citizens that will think about how they can restrict their own consumption and their own economy. And this cannot be called a liberal system anymore. It is a self-restrictive deliberative democracy. As Bruno Latour would say, a Gaian democracy. That's all I wanted to say. I thank you very much, and I'm very hopeful to get a lot of questions from you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Falando aqui para a nossa audiência brasileira, o professor Fernando consegue compreender português, né, sobretudo português escrito, Então, sintam-se livres para mandar as perguntas, tá? Antes de mais nada, professor Fernando, dizer que foi muito interessante participar. Acho que você trouxe muitos pontos importantes.
What role does the post-metaphysical imperative play in shaping the dynamics of the new public sphere? Yes, so that's the problem. So my critique is that for Habermas, there is no role for this, for metaphysics. So there is of course, a post-metaphysical imperative, which means that you should restrain philosophy to you could say, politics and ethics, and to have a more sociologically restricted form of philosophy. And so this is political awareness that contributes, of course, to the public sphere. That is the old Habermas, you could say. But I think that what we now see is that we need a larger concept of rationality. And for that, we need, in fact, not a post-metaphysical imperative, but a rediscovery of the metaphysical tradition, because the metaphysical tradition was critical theory. It was critical theory about what are the deepest presuppositions of our worldviews. If we say that we should constrain rationality to the human society, then you are getting in, you're becoming problems in a system that is now moving towards a more ecological society. Because in an ecological society, you want to know what are the properties of other entities that make them to be viewed as having a kind of dignity, which is different than the human dignity. So, and if our human dignity is constituted by our communicative capacities, then this you cannot say it for other entities. So you have to have a larger concept of what this dignity is, and this can be done. This is what the metaphysical tradition said. If you enlarge the concept of reason, if you acknowledge that there is not just reason in humans and in human communication, but there is also intelligence and rationality in the world outside, which is in line with the whole concept of science itself. There is rationality outside there, and communication of our communication is just a means, it's just a procedure to discover that rationality out there. So rationality cannot be restricted to our means of discovering the rationality. It's like, for example, Socrates saying that his method of dialogues would just be the only truth that he can find. But it's the dialogue that is trying to find a truth beyond dialogue, you could say. So if you want to come to a society in which you have a more ecological concept of deliberative politics and deliberative democracy, then you should enlarge the concept of rationality. And I think the social media can help us to do that, because we see that in the social media, although there are a lot of dangers in the social media, you also see there is getting depth into it. So people are searching and getting deeper into things and are educating themselves. So what we have to do is to create an educative system in which we learn how to deal with the social media and how to deal with it in a critical way, with a critical mind. And to do that, you also need a philosophical training, and philosophical training not just on the level of politics and ethics, but also on the level of metaphysics, because you are dealing with large different worldviews that are colliding and that are entering into the discussion, of which you want to know what the rationality of is. So I would say, so what role does the post-metaphysical imperative play in shaping the dynamics of the new public sphere? In Habermas, it is a role that restricts philosophy to ethics and political philosophy, and gets rid or abandons the concept of a rational metaphysics. But I don't agree with it. So I don't think that is possible for an ecological future. So the problem is that Habermas has a very nice theory which has large advantages for a concept of sociology and politics, but it is not made for a society that we will encounter in the future, which is a society in which there is a larger ecological awareness. So we cannot deal with the ecological problem, I would say, of a concept of dignity that is larger than the human dignity. I hope to have answered this question. Thank you for the question.
Mais alguma pergunta? Alguém quer enviar mais alguma pergunta aqui para o nosso chat? Professor Fernando, a gente tem aqui até meio-dia, então nós temos mais ou menos uns 14 minutos a mais, então acho que cabe mais 2 perguntas.
I can ask also a question in Portuguese. Maybe my presentation was too fast in English.
No, I think it was slow enough. It was enough to use a automatic translation from YouTube, so I think.
Okay.
Alguém tem mais alguma dúvida? Um comentário? Just waiting about 1 minute to see if there's any comment or question, okay?
Yes.
Okay, the question for you from Professor Flo.
Thank you, Clovis. No, I don't think Marx is metaphysical. No, at all. He was against metaphysics. That's the tradition that Habermas is taking up. He's taking up the more Marxist tradition and limiting philosophy to politics and sociology. But this is contrary to the tradition of the critical theory school, of the School of Frankfurt. The School of Frankfurt didn't want to, they are Marxists, but they wanted to go beyond Marx. And they opened themselves for other theories, and they therefore didn't agree with Marx's idea that we should get rid of metaphysics. So Adorno speaks about the negative dialectics, and Horkheimer relates to Schopenhauer. So they all feel that they have to elaborate some type of metaphysical background, because they know that just to keep to the limits of the human society is too narrow. And this truth has become now very relevant in the time of the ecological crisis, because we are now asking ourselves, whether we have been too anthropocentric. And I would say Marx was also anthropocentric. And this is something that Walter Benjamin, who was very much inspired by the metaphysical tradition of the Kabbalah, and Adorno, Horkheimer already understood, so that you cannot separate a social critical philosophy from a metaphysics. And this is something that was not taken over by Habermas. And this is a deficiency, I would say, in Habermas' concept of rationality. And therefore, he remains very much an anthropocentric thinker. He limits rationality to the concept of human communication, so to an anthropocentric perspective. And he therefore is not able to understand a larger concept of rationality, of a rationality that can be integrated into the animal kingdom or into nature itself. There is no Naturphilosophie in the idealistic tradition in Habermas, you could say. So I think so. By this, Habermas limited himself to the human society, but he missed the train, you could say, towards an ecological, the development of an ecological democracy. And this is very important for the future. So to think about deliberative democracy will not be possible if we don't think it in the scope of the ecological problem, of the ecological crisis, and of the new ways of understanding dignity and participation, political participation. That's why Bruno Latour is so important, because he thought he showed that political participation should be enlarged, should also encompass non-human entities, and humans should do their best to translate the interests and views of all those entities that have no voice. So in fact, it's a democracy for the voiceless, for those who have no voice. And that is not possible in Habermas' theory of communicative action, you say. So there is a limit there, which origin is in Marxism itself, because Marxism was very much anthropocentric.
Thank you very much, Professor. I do have a little question. I don't know if it's possible for you to answer for us, because it was not about your theme, but to talk a little bit about Bruno Latour, about Adorno and Horkheimer. I was thinking, do you think we can relate that theory, what you're bringing for us, with, for example, Honneth research about recognition, and talking about Frankfurt School? I was thinking
Yes.
about Honneth participation. I do have this question.
I think there is another question of Elisabeth Artmann. Habermas não é filósofo post-metafísico, acredita num projeto de modernidade ainda inacabado. Em seu último livro, em português, discute a reestruturação da esfera pública, cita a novas mídias. Yes. So, yes, okay. I would say he is a post-metaphysical. So I would not agree with this. Habermas não é filósofo post-metaphysical. He wants to be he wrote 3 books about it. So, nach metaphysisches Denken. So he has 2 volumes of that. So in different times, one in the 80s, another in the 2008 or something like that, and now in 2018 his larger book on the history of philosophy. So, and he says that we should move. There is a kind of post-metaphysical imperative. So, and this means to restrict philosophy to ethics and to politics, which is what he is doing. Of course, he's saying the project of the modernity is not finished, but for him, the process of modernity is not the process of going back to metaphysical deliberations. For him, the process of modernity is getting rid of metaphysical deliberations. He wants to distance himself from it. And he does not believe that there is something like a prima philosophia. He says that clearly in his 2000 or 1400 pages book. And so, and that's a problem. So also in the last 500 pages of his book on the history of philosophy, he tries to demonstrate that modern philosophy in the 19th and 20th century is post-metaphysical, but he's not able to do that. He's trying to do that with Kierkegaard, and then he has to say, okay, but Kierkegaard is also believes in religion, but it's a personal thing. So as long as there is a metaphysics that is personal, there is no problem, but you cannot have an epistemological claim with it, connected to it. It is just a personal belief, you could say. So on that level, you are on the level of the religions itself. That's possible in the future. That's the Protestant attitude that Habermas still has, to say philosophy as metaphysics has no use because this is all about beliefs, yeah? And everybody has his own belief. All these beliefs should be respected, but there cannot be a kind of systematic discourse on the validity of certain metaphysics against other metaphysics or things like that. So a rational, so the distinction between doxa and episteme that has been introduced by Plato, for him, metaphysics like religion is doxa. It's not episteme. So there is no epistemological conception of metaphysics possible. And he says modern philosophy in the 19th and 20th century are demonstrating this. It's his main interlocutor is there Kant. He says Kant is the one who finished with metaphysics, in fact, although it's a very particular interpretation of Kant that Habermas has, but that is his interpretation. It's from Kant on, there is only personal beliefs, but there is no rational claim of validity in metaphysics. So that's the problem. Habermas la complejidad de integrar las nuevas medias. Yes, of course. This is in his last book. Yes, there is a complexity. That's what I'm saying. That so there in the social media. But if you look at this book, this small book of him about the new about the new public sphere, you see that he has a very negative conception of the social media. I put it in my presentation. On one page he says, there are also advantages of the social media, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'm only going to talk about the negative things, about the dangers of the social media. And he's emphasizing that there is a real danger that the social media can intercede in the realm of the deliberative democracy. So that there is no that it will have a negative impact on deliberative politics, because nobody knows what to believe anymore. There is so much information, so much complexity, there is so much chaos, there is no holistic possibility to integrate everything. That's his quite negative position on the social media. And I would say, of course, he is right on one hand, but we should try to integrate it in our educational system. If we integrate it into our educational system, how to deal with the social media, then we can and also learn how to be critical. Then we can be more positive about how the social media can contribute to a public sphere that supports deliberative democracy. That would be my comment. And maybe to get back to the question about Bruno Latour, I hope this was enough. About Bruno Latour, so yes, the question is very important, because what we see in the last 20 years, the last 2 decades of the 21st century is the development of a larger concept of deliberation. A deliberation that includes also non-human entities. So what you need is a larger ontology. People are speaking about a relational ontology, but in fact it's again an ontology. It's to rethink metaphysics. And so it is not possible to enter into an ecological society, into an ecological responsible democracy without reflecting again about the basics of our worldview, which has been always very anthropocentric. And to reflect about these basics is to do metaphysics. Is to do why are human beings allowed to have rights and non-human beings shouldn't have them? And if non-human beings have rights, why do they have rights? Based on what properties? And then you need to elaborate about a concept of intelligence, or about consciousness, about feelings, that is larger than the human domain. That can also be there in the animal kingdom, that can also be there in the natural world. So what you need is a philosophy of nature that integrates a concept of rationality that is larger than the communicative rationality envisioned by Habermas, which is very much anthropocentric. So that's why Bruno Latour, Hans Jonas, and all these ecological philosophers are so important. So I would say I'm very positive about the philosophy of Habermas, but now we see that there are limitations and that we should go beyond Habermas without forgetting Habermas, because the most important element in Habermas' philosophy is the idea of free speech, of free dialogue, of free communication. In that sense, he is the post-war philosopher par excellence, you could say. Yeah. So, but in our times, in the 21st century, we also need to go beyond that and to see that there should be free speech, but also to think about a form of rationality that is not just exclusively connected to human communication, but could be connected to other forms of intelligence outside there in the world.
Very interesting, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Quero agradecer a todas as pessoas presentes durante as mesas da manhã, tanto as mesas de abertura, quanto agora a apresentação do professor Fernando. Nós tivemos um debate muito rico, eu acho que a complementação entre as palestras aconteceu de forma que a gente consegue sair daqui com várias dúvidas e várias novas questões que nos são interessantes, são importantes. Lembrando que essas duas são as primeiras mesas do colóquio, mas ele vai se estender até o dia 26. Então, gostaria que vocês ficassem aí atentos aos links de transmissão no YouTube, porque para cada apresentação vai ter um link diferente, todos eles integrados nesse mesmo canal. Então, é isso, agradecer a presença de todos, agradecer a presença do professor Fernando, do professor Clóvis, do nosso serviço aqui de transmissão, Henrique, né? Agradecer demais a todos vocês e desejar um excelente dia e uma excelente continuidade de colóquio.
Thank you.
Thank you.